Welcome to the second part of the Resident Evil map tutorial. In the last part, we went over setting all the system up from item tables to the tables about the floor to the tables about the rooms, as well as changing the different statuses for the items in our details here as we connect them to the rooms, as we pick them up, as we display them on the map. Now, we haven't done any displaying for the map, we haven't done any visuals at all. That's what we're going to be working on this part. Now, before we get into the actual display itself, we're going to start off by opening our item here. And in the last part, we added our interface. We want to use that interface and finish it because we kind of forgot to do our second one here. We did our room name, I believe, where we passed the room name, but we also want to get the item data here. So get linked item data, double click on it, and it will open a function for you. And we just want to fill out this information. So it's very simple. We want to get our item information, our data table row handle, control drag it, right click to split, get the name, plug the row name here. And for the location, we want our well location. For the floor, we want our floor. So plug these three in, and that's all we have to do here. So we can compile that, close it, and we don't need the item anymore now. So we can close the item, we won't be looking at that anymore. Now, next, we're going to make a function library just to create one small function that will allow us to convert our location to the map. So this is for the player, but it's also for the items as well. So we're going to right click in our blueprints. We're going to go down and get blueprint function library right here. So we'll call this FL scale and open it up. And inside of here, we have a new function created by default. We'll rename this to location, or we'll call world to map. And it's going to take in a vector coordinates, and it's going to return a 2D location, so 2D vector at the bottom here, and that's going to be our output, which is going to be the position on the map. So we'll just do in and out, and we're going to turn this into a pure, and let's go through this right now. So as I mentioned, I believe in the last part, we want to make sure that our coordinates, at least on our map, so right now I'm on the third person template map, but we want to go to our station here. And in the station, I wanted to make it very clear that we do not want to move the level. We want to make sure the level remains exactly where it is, because otherwise the numbers I'm going to give you now for this conversion won't actually work, because the map isn't the same size or the map isn't at the same location, so the coordinates won't function correctly. So make sure you don't move it based on what I did. And if you want to make your own map, you just have to kind of guess these coordinates yourself. It probably won't be perfect on the first try, but it's not that difficult to do. We're going to start off by simply converting this into 2D, because we don't care about the Z, because we only have a 2D map. So we don't care about that. So we just say 2D vector, and we just have the top one here, 2D vector. We'll just get an X and Y, which is all we want. Then we'll say minus. And what we want to subtract here is we want to get another one. So we're going to make another one here. So say make 2D vector. And for X and Y, we specifically want 2165 and 265. And so what these two are, they are technically the 0, 0 of the map in world space. That's what these coordinates are. So relative to our textures that we have here. So the center of this texture, for instance, is about, we'll consider it here, and that is these coordinates right there. So that's what we kind of work with. So next we need a make literal float. And so this is going to be the scale difference. So I'll just mark it here, and this is the scale between world and map. And so in my case, based on the map I've given you and on the map, the physical or the 3D map that I gave, it's 5.3. And now this isn't perfect. There are some cases where you can walk through the walls based on the map or on the wall, but it's not perfect. It's for a tutorial. If you're doing this for a proper game, you might want to take a bit more time to get the numbers perfect. So we actually need to invert these by saying this divided, sorry, no, I got that wrong. Sorry, leave this as it is for now. And we want to say divide. And the thing is, we can't actually use this like this. We want to plug our X here, split that, detach it, split this, and split this one. And we want to do X into Y and Y into X. So just invert them pretty much. The reason for this is because our world space X and Y is kind of the opposite of the 2D space X and Y on the map. So that's why we do this. And in addition, because of how the UI works in Unreal, we need to do another change, and that is that 1 on the X is fine, but on the Y it needs to be the opposite. So we'll say -1, so that it inverts kind of the coordinates. And then finally, we want to go and add this. So I'll just use the bottom one here. This is going to go into our out. We want to make a vector, which we'll be calling map size. And that is going to be our another 2D vector. Or actually, to be fair, we could make this a literal 2D. I think that would work fine as well. So here we're just going to say divided by 2. So right click on the bottom one, turn it to a float and just say 2. And on the top one, we're going to do once again a make 2D vector. And this is going to be the map size. And the map size is going to be 2560 by 1912. And once again, same case, this is because of the numbers here and the numbers here. And because of the map I gave you, that's what we should use. So if you have your custom map, once again, these are the values you'd want to change. So this is the 2D map size. There we go. So this will do our conversion. So if we put in our 3D location, be it the player, be it an item, this will convert it into a 2D location on the map. So we can compile that. We don't need this anymore. We can remove the map size here. Sorry, we don't need it. We have it here. So compile and save, close that. And now we can make our widgets. So we're going to go back into our main folder, into the widget one. We'll use it now. And we will create 3 widgets. So in user interface, widget blueprint, basic user widget will do, and we'll call this UMG map will be the first one. It's going to be the main one. We can duplicate it, call the second one UMG floor, and we'll make a third one, which we're going to be calling not UMG, we already have that, UMG, and this will be image. The first thing we want to work on is our image. So go and open that, and all we want to add to this is an image. So we're going to drag an image to UMG image here, and that's about it. We won't do anything else. This is pretty much all you want. We're not going to touch anything else. What we're going to do in our graph, though, we're going to make a little change. All we need is our pre-construct. Now you can do this on construct, it does work as well, but the reason we do pre-construct is that we can see the changes in the editor, because it does help. So our image here, we're going to get it and we're going to say set brush from texture, and we're going to promote the texture to a variable. So promote, and we will call this brush texture, and we want to make sure we put this as a variable so that we can see it instance editable, and we also want to expose it on spawn as well. And one thing we want is we want to match size, so that way it is always at the size of, for instance, the map that we're going to give it. It's going to be the right size. So drag this in here, move the bits aside. Next, we want to say for our brush here, no, not our brush, sorry, our image, we're going to set color and opacity, this one right here, and we're going to promote this to a variable as well. This will be, we'll just call it color override, and once again, visible and exposed on spawn, both of these, line those up, there we go. And one more with the image, we're going to give it an opacity, so set opacity, which will itself also be visible by promoting it to a variable. So drag it out, promote to variable, and we'll just leave this as in opacity. It works just fine. Make sure it is instance editable and exposed on spawn. Now we can compile this. We're done with our image now, and we can move on to the next part, which is going to be the floor. Now the floor is where we actually get to determine how we pack our kind of different textures. So what I mean by that is earlier when we were making our system, we did a data table where we handled the floor info. So if we look at the floor info here, we have 3 textures and we gave them specific numbers here, not just 0, 1, 2, 3, but 0, 2, 3, so that we can actually control which Z layer they're on. So we can stack them in whichever order we want based on this. So that's where that is going to come in here, and that's what we're going to work on right now. We're going to start by adding a canvas panel. It's the first thing we're going to need, and we're also going to add an image, and we're going to drag that in, and the image is going to be the player. So here we're going to change the brush to the player. There we go, and we're going to make it size 80 by 80. Now you're free to change this if you want to. One other thing we do want to make sure we do is we change its alignment. So to 0.5 and 0.5, so it should appear in the top corner like this. And as far as the designer goes, this will do it. We might want to rename this to image player so that we know what we're talking about. There we go. And we can go to our graph now. Once again, we only need our pre-construct here. And what we're going to do is we are going to say get data table, and we're looking for get data table row. And what we're looking for specifically is all the information we need. So pretty much what we had in our A item. So, or not our A item, but our DT floor, sorry. So to do that, we need that information. So we're going to get a variable we're going to call layer, and it's going to be of type data table row. So this one right here, which we can then plug in directly here by splitting it. So just plug this in here. And what we want to do is we want to make sure this is visible. So we want to make sure it's exposed on spawn so that we can do it at runtime if we need. So compile and save. And now obviously the out row is incorrect because we doesn't know what it is. So we're going to break it into our floor data because that's what we're going to get. That's what we're going to set it to. We're going to promote this to a variable, and this is going to be called floor ID. That's the floor that we're on. And next, we want to use all this information to kind of add those layers. So we're going to just reroute this, and we want to get the keys, plug the keys in right there, and for each loop, yeah, to get through them. So we're also just going to line that up a bit better there, and we're going to move this back a bit, because we're going to need another one to go above it, like here, and because we always need to call a find here so we can use the actual value and not just the keys. So with the keys, we can tell which one it is. Make sure you choose array element and not array index. And what we're going to do is we are going to say create widget, and the widget we're going to create is our image that we made earlier. So look for UMG image, and here we can pass in all the information we need. So brush texture is going to be this because that's what we saved in our map, not our map, our data table, sorry. Color override, we're going to actually go and open this up and turn it to white by default. That way we don't have to bother doing it here. Open UMG image and look for our color override and change it from this to white with 1 opacity, although the opacity doesn't really matter too much. And we'll also change our in opacity to be 1 by default as well. So compile, save, close that. And now what we want to do is, I actually forgot, we do need to make sure our canvas panel is variable. Otherwise we can't actually place the items in it. So we'll just call this CP floor and go to graph again and get a reference to our floor and say add child to canvas. Plug it in the return value, and the return value, sorry, goes into content and just here. We don't need anything else. We're going to be using this here. So next we can actually call size by content here because we want to make sure that it fits the whole map. So it doesn't just stop halfway because of the size or whatnot. It does, even if it has to go outside of the borders here, for instance. We also want to make sure we set Z order here. And this is where our map kind of comes in for our data table, is we can now tell it what Z to be on. So to get that, we just want to go to our array elements and just reroute it all the way to here. Now I just noticed something. Because we did this before, if we refresh this, it should become white and 1. So right click, refresh, there we go. Next, we're going to need another thing, and this is going to be set alignment. Want to make sure it's 0.5, 0.5. So plug it in here. There we go. And one last one, which is going to be set in the anchors. So set anchors. And so just for those who are unaware, the anchors are the values that you have right here. So pretty much if you expand this, you can change them with actual float values, but it's the same as doing this here. So back in, we want to attach this here, and we can split in anchors here. And very simply, we want to put it 0.5, 0.5, 0.5, and 0.5, so it's right in the middle of our graph here, right in the middle of our canvas panel. And so with this, we are done. Right now, technically, the map is ready. And the reason we aren't seeing it is because we haven't actually set a default value for it. So to get that, all we have to do is to go into our UMG floor here, and we can tell it which layer we're talking about. So we're going to tell it we're talking about floor info, and we're going to say floor 1. And now we have our map, and this is 3 layers. It has the dirt, it has the background, and it has the outlines with the names. And so with that, we're going to be able to do all the rest. And we have our player here. Now there's one problem right now, our player is appearing under it. So we want to change that. We want to make sure our player always appears on top. And to do that, we can just simply change the Z order. Now, by default, in our case, it never goes over 3. So we're just going to put it to 5. That way it's always on top and there's no issue. If you have more layers, then in that case, you want to have a higher value. Or if you even want to do it automatically, you could just store the highest one you get from this. And then at the end, say, set the player Z order to the highest value you found, +1. So I think we're going to go through the rest here, get the different elements for our floor to be done, and then we'll move on to the map as a whole. So I think the first thing we'll do is we're going to make a function to adjust our player coordinates. So we're going to say UpdatePlayerPosition. And this isn't going to be too difficult. It's because we made our function library, it's very, very simple. So first thing we want to do is we want to check, is the player visible? And we're going to do that by saying, is our widget visible? And we'll control later by saying this isn't visible with certain conditions. So branch. And if it is visible, that means we want to update its location. And all we have to do is we will get our player here, our image. We want to make sure we slot as canvas slot. Otherwise, we can't actually tell it to change its position, because it doesn't know that it's in a canvas directly. So here we're informing it of that. So we're going to say set position. And with that, we now have our position. Next, we want to get our player character. And we want to say get get actor location. And this is what we want. This is our world location. We can't just plug it directly. We want to get our world to map. And we can just plug this straight into here. And there we go. Now, one extra thing we can do is we can do rotation. And to do that, we want to get a reference to our player again. We're going to say get actor rotation. And all we want out of this is our Z, our yaw, because that's what's going to control where we're looking relative to top down. So get our player image, set its render angle, and plug in our yaw here. And now we have a character that will update on the map. Depending on how you do this, if you have, for instance, your map can be open while the character moves, in that case you want to have this be on a tick, for instance. But in our case, I'm not going to allow the player to, or we don't want the player to really move when the map is open, so we're just going to say that we do it once the map is opened, we update the location. Simple as that. So our next step is we want to add our items to the map. So that's the next thing we want to look for. And to do that, we're going to make a new function once again. So add item to map. What we need to know is we need to know which row we are attempting to add. So we're going to do input, and we're going to look for our data table row handle again, right here. And we'll call this row data. Then we're going to add another one, which is the location. So this is going to be our world location. So we're going to say in location. And we don't need a return for this. For this, we'll just stick with what we have here. So we're going to break this data. So what we're going to do here is kind of a mix between what we did when we created the map, so what we did right here, and what we did in our update player location, because this time we need to place them in a location instead of just in 0, 0. So what we need is an image again. So we're going to say create widget. We're going to select our image, and our brush texture is going to be our... Sorry, I made a mistake. I think, yeah, sorry, I got this wrong. This isn't what we need. What we need is the item data structure. Sorry, so item data is what we're looking for. So st item data, and now we can actually break this and get useful information out of it. So break it, icon is going to go there. And so once again, white, we don't want to change the color of the image. It's just fine as it is. And once again, we want to get our floor, and we're going to say add child to canvas. So right here, and another reroute here just to line it up nicely. Now once again, right here we're going to add a few reroutes. First one is going to go to size to content set. It's going to be true as well. The Z order this time we want it to be 4, so we want it to be below the player but above everything else. So once again, if in your case it's different, then you need to have another value, but we're going to set Z order to 4. 5 being the player, 3 being the highest layer of the map. So let's just move these a bit across. Next, we're going to set our alignment. So set alignment. There we go. For some reason, it wasn't appearing. So another rework, I need it one more time. 0.5, 0.5 again, so that we are centered. And this time it's not about the anchor, but it's centered, as in we want to use the pivot for the item to be in the center of the item. Next one is going to be set size, because this time we do want to say that the image is only 80 by 80. Otherwise it would be maybe too big. So we want to make sure it only appears at a certain size on the map. And finally, we're going to say set position. So we want to get our in location, our input, all the way to the bottom here. And we're going to do, once again, world to map. Line these up, plug this in, and there we go. That'll do it for our adding an item to the map. And when I say add item, this is maybe not the best term, but what it just means is it's displaying the item. We're not talking about adding items like we are talking about in an inventory. It really is specifically just adding it to the map visually. And the next thing we need to do is we're going to do the same thing, but for the rooms, kind of the exact same idea here. So we're going to do add, but this time we also have the possibility of modifying, so or modify room. And the inputs are going to need our room data, so room data, so st room data, we'll just say room data here. And second, we need the status, so we're going to say status, and we're looking for our eRooms status, so we'll just call this exactly that. So once again, first thing we want is we want to call create widget, and once again our image at the bottom here. We're going to break our data, and our room texture is going to go in here. Our color this time is going to be different. We're going to select it right here based on the status. So we're going to get status here. So at the bottom, and we are going to say if it is double equal, make sure you choose the top one, not the bottom one. If it is double equal to complete, then we're going to say it is blue. So it doesn't matter if it's not perfect. There we go. And otherwise it's going to be red. And so we plug this in on the pick, and so that will change this. Now, if we want a custom opacity, so that's what we're going to do here. We're going to make one, and we're going to say room opacity, not like that, opacity like that, and it's going to be a float, and we're just going to plug this into here. Now, we're also going to make it instance editable, so that this way, because we're going to place these floors on the actual map itself manually in the editor, we'll actually be able to change each floor to be different if we want. So compile, and right here this will do most of it. We don't need any of the other information here, so we can hide the unconnected pins. And just like before, we're going to reroute a few times. Sorry, no, not that one. We're going to call add child. Oh, once again, we need a reference to our canvas panel floor. Add child to canvas. Plug it in and plug the content in as well. A few reroutes here because we need to first size to content. Set to true. As I mentioned before, how we made this is we did it by having the textures all be on the same total space of the map. So that means that we don't need to do any positioning. We just need to say it is centered. So what we're going to do is we're also going to say first we set Z order, and the Z order is going to be 1, because if you remember in our data table, we did 3 for the highest level, 2 and 0. So that means that our rooms here are going to be above the kind of gray background, but they're going to be behind the lines, and they're also going to be behind the names and going to be behind the dirt, so that we kind of get a nice look to it. So instead of just having the dirt be below and have a basic red square, we have a bit of a nicer look to it. Obviously this is free for you to customize, you don't have to do it this way. These are very simple things to change. So we'll then say set alignment right here to 0.5 as well. And we also want to make sure we set the anchor this time to the same thing as before, so it's centered alongside with the actual images of the floor. So split and 0.5, 0.5, 0.5, and 0.5. And that'll do it for pretty much all of this. Everything is set up now. So with this, we can pretty much just move on to straight onto the map. So the next is, well, the map. So open it up, we can close the floor, we don't need it. So this is probably going to be where most of the work is. So let's get into it. So we're going to start with a scale box right here. And then we're going to add a canvas panel. And we want to make sure our canvas panel is fill here. So at the top right, fill horizontally, fill vertically. And the next thing we want is just to make things kind of a bit more easy to view. It's going to be a background blur. That's what we're looking for. So drag this onto the canvas panel. And we'll just make sure it is set to fill, so 0 and 0. And we'll just put it to something like 3. So you can actually see it there, but it's not ruining what's behind. So what we'll do now is we're going to add a canvas panel in the middle. Now, it would be better to do this with an overlay, but I couldn't seem to figure it out, so I just stuck with the canvas panel. But for optimization's sake, it would be better with an overlay. So we're just going to set this to be alignment to 0.5 and 0.5. In the scale, you want to make sure the stretch is set to fill. And now that should be correct now. So right here it is in the center, and it should be 0, 0 here. So there we go, it should look like this. If we have anchor set to 0, 0, make sure your scale box is set to stretch fill and not stretch scale to fit. So in our second canvas panel here, we will just rename it to make it easier to follow. Actually, it should be renamed and also visible. So CP, we'll call it canvas panel, and we'll call this map. And this is because in here we're going to have every specific element, so make it variable as well. And for size, we want this to be 1600 by 800, and you can modify this. It's not a problem if you want to change it, because technically we're going to be cutting the edges, so it should fit any situation. So to cut those edges, we want to make sure instead of clipping inherit, we want to make sure it clips to bounds. And so that means any image that's outside will be cut. Specifically in our case, the map. It will cut off the floors on the outside so that we only see the specific area in the middle. So one extra thing we do need for this to work is we're going to need a little image as a background so that we can actually click and interact with the map. So we're going to make sure this is fill as well. So 0, 0, and we can make it have an opacity of 0 so that we don't see it, but it is still clickable. So make sure this remains visible here. And so we'll rename this that we know image background. There we go. Now next, we're going to need another canvas panel. And this is why, once again, I say overlays would be better, but I couldn't figure it out. Call this on canvas panel zoom. So that's what it's going to be used for. And now we can finally have our map. We can finally show our map here. So we need one last thing, and that is the switcher. And so what this does is it will allow us to very simply change between 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, however many different widgets you want on it. So make sure this is also set to fill, because we want it to take up the whole screen. And sorry, I forgot, we also want to make sure our zoom is also full screen as well. And one thing we also want to make sure is that our zoom is size to content. And the same will hold true for our switcher here. We want to make sure that is the case here. It is 0.5 in alignment. And now we want to add our floor. So we're going to look for floor, and we're going to drag one into here. And so here we go. We now have our map, and we want to duplicate it, and we'll say floor 1 and floor 2. And so now we have both of these. Now the first one is obviously floor 1 by default, because that's how we set it up. But if we go to the bottom one, we can change this to floor 2. And now when we select it, it will kind of swap. Now it does have this kind of weird glitch. It's not an issue of this, appearing behind it, because we've just hidden it. We can still see it. So the problem is more that it is for some reason keeping the 2 layers. Also, one thing very quickly before I forget, back in our widgets for our floor, I want to make sure that our opacity is 0.3 by default at least. I think we have an issue with the fact that it's not deleting them. So what we'll do is we're going to make sure that every time we pre-construct, we clear everything that was there before. So from our canvas panel floor, we're going to say remove, I think it's clear that we want. Yeah, we want to say clear. Now I'm not sure if this will get rid of our player character. If that's the case, it's kind of annoying. We'll have a double check. Yeah, so that does create an issue where our player character doesn't exist. So that is a bit problematic. Let's just see if at least that this solves our issue. So it does. So it does fix the issue at least. So that's good to know. So let's try and figure out how we can keep this. Well, actually, a very easy solution would be to, what we'll do is we will, before adding this, we're going to use the loop to get rid of the old elements. So I'm just going to add a reroute here, move this up here, and we're going to say from our floor here, we're going to say remove child at, and the index we're looking for is pretty much this +1, because we have our player by default. This is automatically going to be the one above. So we're going to say array index +1, and this should fix our issue. Let's plug this in and compile and save. And so now we have our player. This still appears, the map appears as it should. And we can go and just double check this. We want the opacity to be 0.3 about. It's about correct. If you want to change it, fine, not a problem. Let's just double check. If we swap between the maps, they appear correctly without the issue. Our player is still in the top left. Okay, now that we have our map pretty much ready on this end, the only thing we do still need is something that can change our floor. So we're going to make a button for that, and I'm going to do this very simply, unlike what I did in my part. So we're going to do on our map here, I think, and we're going to make sure that it appears outside of our map. No, that doesn't work because our map hides everything. Okay, so what we'll do is we will just move that. We are going to get our button here. We're going to place it on the main canvas panel. And what we'll do is we'll drag this here so that it kind of lines up with our widget here. So that way it will always move based on that, because the scaling can sometimes be an issue. And we're just going to leave this button here, and it will be for changing floors. So I'm just going to put this here, 0.5, 0.5. And we'll just put it 0 and 0, and for some reason that, oh, but sorry, that was my bad. We want to keep that there. I just want to move this to 0, 0. For some reason, that alignment didn't like it for some reason. Okay. And so here we'll just move it to the left here by making that negative, and we'll just put it to 60 by 60. And this will be floor, we'll call this button floor change. So with this, we now have all the elements visible here that we need. So we can move on to the more complicated part, which is writing the graph. So open it up. And I think we will start by all the different variables we need, or the few variables we do need. The first one is going to be a reference to our tracking info, because we need to know all the information regarding items and all of that. So we need that. So we're going to get a map info, we'll call it. It's going to be of type AC underscore track map info, object reference. And we want to make sure it is instance editable and exposed on spawn. So that way, when we create the widget, we can give it all the information we need. Next, we want the zoom float, we're going to call it, or zoom, sorry, alone, and it's going to be a float, and that's just going to be to track how close or how far we are of the screen. So by default, we want this to be 1, so it's normal, so we can scroll back and forth. Next, we want to know what floor we are on. So we're going to duplicate this, and we're going to call this floor, current floor. It's going to be a integer, and by default we want it to be 1, because in this case we're on floor 1 by default. Next, another one we'll call zoom sub step, so just kind of how we move closer. Is it by 0.1 every time, or every time we scroll the mouse wheel? So you can go slower or faster. So for that, we're going to compile, and we're going to put this to 0.05. And finally, the last thing we need is going to be our mouse down, because we need to track whether the mouse is down to do some of our actions. So Boolean and compile. So that's all our vectors, all our variables. Then we're going to go through our different functions first, and then we'll start kind of assembling everything. So let's start with the overrides. We're going to look for OnMouseWheel, mouse wheel. There we go. And then we're going to look for mouse button down. Then we're going to look for mouse button up. And last, we're going to look for mouse move right here. So we'll start with mouse wheel, which pretty much, as you can guess, it's going to be for zooming. It's not going to be too difficult. What we want is from our mouse event, we're going to get our delta. So get wheel delta, it's called. And pretty much it's just going to say 1 or -1 based on how we scrolled. We're going to multiply this by our substep, so that's how fast we want it to move. And we're going to get our zoom, and we're going to add it to this difference, or the new kind of addition we'll do to it. So that can be negative or positive based on if you scroll up or down. And we want to make sure that this clamps, because there has to be a limit to how close or how far you can zoom. And the values, in my case, I'm going to put them to 0.45 and 2. But you're free to change these if you want. This is just how far I preferred it. This is what I wanted it to be. So here we're going to do this. We're going to select our return here, and we're going to actually call a function. And the reason we want to call this with a function is because in some scenarios we might want to say, when we load the map, that we want it to appear at this zoom, because that's what we had previously. So we're going to turn this into a function, right click, collapse the function, update zoom. And so we're just going to save this here, and then we'll move on to the zoom function itself. So to make sure this works, you want to make sure we call this is handled, that we've actually, which means this was technically a success, which it is, because there's never a scenario where it fails. So open update zoom, and let's quickly go through this. Not too difficult here. We just want to set our new zoom, because we haven't actually done that in our wheel here. Did I do that in the wrong spot? I think I did that in the wrong spot. Okay. Copy this. Shouldn't be in move. It should be in the mouse wheel. So right here, plug this into our mouse event, connect our UpdateZoom, and plug this in here, and once again, handled. So we're done with the mouse wheel. We don't need that, and we can do UpdateZoom now. So as I just said, we didn't actually set the zoom there, so we're going to do it here. And we're going to get our canvas panel zoom and say set render scale to, well, the zoom. So we just plug this in here for both of them, and we're done with the zooming. It's that easy. So we'll close both of those, or we will close this, and let's move on to our mouse button down. Now, mouse button down and mouse button up are very simple. We're just going to say that the mouse is down. So drag this in on true for down, and make sure we say that it was handled, like this. And then we want to go to mouse button up, where we'll do the same thing. We will drag our mouse button down and say that it's false, because now it is false. So handled, once again, no problem. So the final one we want to do is the move, and that's going to be technically the hardest one we have to do. It's not too difficult, but we'll get to it. So if the mouse is moving, but our mouse button isn't down, we don't want to do anything, because we want to kind of drag the map across. That's how we want to do this. So if it is not true, we want to return that it is unhandled, because we failed. Or technically we failed. You could also put handled here. It doesn't actually do anything in our case, but we want to do it this way. So then we want to get our mouse event, and we will call get last screen space position. And then we want to get our canvas panel map, and we want to call get cached geometry. And so with these two, we can actually convert this mouse position into from absolute, because this is in screen space, to the actual space relative to this geometry. So we'll call absolute to local. So the top one here, plug this in. Absolute coordinates are obviously the screen space, and we're going to promote this to a variable for now, and this will be called L previous location. And so now we're going to do the same thing with these. So copy them. But the difference is that this time we're not going to use last screen space. We're going to use get screen space, and this is the current one. So this is the previous one, and we're going to use that to make the difference. So once again, drag this, and we're going to promote it to a variable as well, and we'll call this L current location. So plug it in here, and now we can do the last bit, which is placing or calculating kind of the difference. So what we're going to do is we're going to set all this into our widget switcher here, so that we can move it around. So get this slot as canvas slot, and we're going to say set position, and this is going to go here, and this is going to go here. And we've already handled it, so we don't need to deal with that. And now the last little bit of math to get this and this into our new position. So we want the current and the previous one, so control drag them both in. Current minus previous. And we're going to multiply this by our zoom, because obviously if we are zoomed in or zoomed out, it is very different. We don't have it the same way, but we want to make sure we divide 1 by this. So 1 divided by zoom will give us the value or the multiplier that we want. And we're then going to do plus this. Let me just align these up. We're going to get our widget switcher here. We're going to slot as canvas slot. And we're going to use this to get its position, so we can add the new difference to its current position. And this will then go into here like this. Now we can turn this into a small macro so that it's easier to reuse. So right click, collapse the macro, and we'll say get map position. There we go. And we need to do one quick last thing here for this to work, or although this technically does work, right now you can just drag it as far as you want and it will never technically stop, because what we're using to determine when we can drag is the image right here that we have as a background, but what we're moving is this. So if this moves, technically, it could keep going forever, and we don't want that. So we want to go to our graph, and we want to make sure right in here, we're going to right click, we're going to say collapse nodes, and we're going to say clamp. Let's just move this a bit so that it's not unorganized here. Control click to open it in a separate tab, and what we want to do pretty much is just make sure that the values are technically safe to use, you could say. So we're going to start by breaking this. There we go. And we're going to clamp these both. So clamp, we'll start with the X. So clamp float. And what we want to clamp it to is we're going to get our zoom, our zoom here. We're going to multiply it by the value. Because obviously zoomed out once again or zoomed in will make the clamp be different because of the map being smaller or larger. So we're going to put 450, and 450 is going to be the max, but it's also going to be the minimum. So we want it to be times -1, because obviously the other side, because it's the same size on both sides, we can just do -1 here. Just drag this and align it up like this. This will be the X. So pull this a bit forwards. And we will copy pretty much the same thing, but it's a bit different here because height-wise, we're not exactly in the middle. So we're going to clamp, once again, our Y like this. This is going to go into our output. And once again, zoom multiplied by this time -550 on the Y. And on the X, we're going to do another zoom. What we want to put in here is 405. And then plug it into the max, and we are done with our clamping. So compile, save. We can close this, and we are done with our OnMouseMove as well now. So we can close that. What we need to do now is we want to add more information to our map. Right now we can move the map, we can see the player on the map, but we don't call any of that. And one thing we're still missing is, well, the items. We have a system that can handle them in the map, in the floors, but we don't ever call them. So we need to do that. So that's what we're going to make here. We're going to make a function called LoadItems. And in LoadItems, we want to start by getting our map info. We're going to get our located items, and we're just going to go through them. We have all the information we need. We just need to cycle through it. So right here, go through that array, and we're going to say get linked data. So we're looking specifically for the item data here because we want all of this. And we will then use our name here to get data table row. And we already know the name, but what we're looking for is the item because that's all we can get from this. We know we're getting item info, so we're going to use item data. So this is so we don't have to kind of carry the whole thing. So we can just keep the icon here instead of having to transfer it as well. And based on our floor, we're going to call a select node. And what we're going to select from is our floor 1 or our floor 2. But obviously in this case, we need 3 because 0 isn't used. Floor 1 is option 1 and floor 2 is option 2. Option 0 should never happen. And on this, we're going to say AddItemsToMap. And all we need in our row data is a split. So we can tell it to take in our icon. Actually, no, we don't even need to split it. We can just return this to this and it will work just fine. And for the location, we will get our world location and just plug it in here. So this will add the item to our map without any issues normally. So next we need to do the same thing, but we need to do it for our rooms because right now we don't have our rooms visible. If one of the rooms has been opened or completed or incompleted, we need to know that. We need to handle that. So we're going to make something similar. We're going to call load rooms, and it load rooms. Pretty much same technique. Get map info, get room status, and we're going to get our keys. Plug this in here. Once again, for each loop, through it all, and we will copy this time instead, and we'll say find. If we can find our array element, we can actually use it and determine our status. So once again, we know what this is. This room is part of our data table, so we can say get data table row again, so that we can get the extra information. And what we're looking for is we're looking for our room information, so room info. And I don't think we need to split this again. No, this time we do. So here, because we don't know what floor a room is on other than through here, we use this. So we're going to do another select, same one at the bottom here. 3, once again, we want our floor 1, floor 2. So floor 1 and floor 2, move these closer here, line them up. And once again, this time we'll call AddOrModifyRoom. So found room here. And we can recombine this, or can we not this time? Okay, no. So we need to do this separately. So break this instead. Plug the floor in here, and we'll just hide the unnecessary ones. Plug the row into here, and this time find is just based on this for our status, so that we can tell it whether it needs to be hidden, whether it needs to be incomplete, and we can adjust from there. So compile, and that will do it for our loading room, our loading items. So we're going to start by making a little macro here, another one, and this is going to be called IsOnSecondFloor. And this is just going to be used so we can tell if the player is on the first or second floor. So to do that, we will right click, get player character. We will get its location, get actor location, split it, and we will say if you are superior to 500, then that means you're on the second floor. So like this, compile, save, close it. And we just need one last function, and that's going to be called IsPlayerVisible. And that's why we need this macro, because we're going to determine if it's visible based on one thing, and that is if we're on the second floor, but we're looking at the first floor, player shouldn't be visible. If we're on the same floor, it should be. So is on second floor. There we go. If it is, we want to get player. So we have our image player here, and we're going to say set visibility like this. And so if on the first floor, if we're on the second floor, then we want to make sure the first floor player is hidden. And on the other hand, we'll just copy this because it's the same thing. If that isn't, on the second floor, meaning we're currently looking at the second floor, we want it to be visible. So now we're just going to copy both of these, and we're going to invert it for the other case. So if we're on the first floor, because it's false, then we want the first floor player to be visible, and otherwise, and in the other case, on the second floor, we want it to be hidden. So there we go, compile, and that can be closed now as well. So now we're going to make the floor selection system. So what we need for that is we need our button. So we're going to do onClicked, and we're going to make 2 functions for this. And those 2, or not 2 functions, we'll do custom events for this. So we'll look for custom event. We'll call this CE select floor 1. And we're going to make another one. So I'm just going to copy the name, which is going to be CE select floor 2. And what we want to do is we're going to tell our selected current floor here to be our floor 1, right here, floor ID. So that way, if ever it changes, we still know what it is. It should be stored here as well. And with this, we want to make sure that our map or our widget switcher actually switches. So we're going to say set active widget, set active index. Both would work, but we'll just use the active index instead. 0. And now we're just going to copy this, place it below, and we will do the exact same thing. We just want to replace this by number 2 and this by index 1. And the last thing also, we want to make sure that we is player visible, because we need to update that if we switch floor. Now for switching, we're going to click the button here, and that is going to be very simple. We're going to use a flip flop, and that's going to swap between 2 every click we make. So we're going to call here select floor 2, because by default floor 1 should be selected. So we'll say select floor 1. go back to floor 1. One other thing I also just remembered, another mouse event we do need to handle is what happens if the mouse, for instance, is down, but it leaves the area. We should consider that as false. So we're going to actually get that and look for OnMouseLeave. So this will appear here, and we just want to call set mouse down to false. The first thing we can do here on our, well, not actually this one, we don't want this. In our case, we want to use our event construct here. So event construct. And here we want to call first, the first thing we want is from both our floors, we want to say UpdatePlayerPosition, assuming that you don't have the player move during the map being open. Otherwise, this would have to be on event tick. So we're going to start with a sequence, and we're going to just do this in a few parts, just so it's readable. So 3, we're going to get our map info, and this is kind of going to be discussing how we load the different areas, so how that works. So here we're going to say map save, or did we not make that yet? I don't think we made that. No, so we haven't made these. So we're going to need to go quickly to our map here. So to our AC map track here. And we're going to make a few variables. The first one is going to be a float, which we'll call scale state. It's going to be a float. And by default, it's going to be 1. Next, we want a position state. This is going to be a vector 2D, like this. Then we want a map save state, and this is just going to record which method we want to use to kind of save our position. So I think we have that. If I'm not sure we made it last part. So save. The map, we called it emap save, sorry. So compile and save, and finally we want floor state. This is going to be just an integer, and by default should be set to 1. Compile, and there we go. So we don't actually need to touch these here, they're fine as is, it's not a problem. We'll just go back to our map now so that we can actually use them. Floor isn't necessary either. So here we're going to get our save map state. We're going to switch on it. So that's going to be the first thing. And so if we want to keep our previous navigation, we'll do that one first. We're going to get our map here. And not this one, sorry, our widget switcher, my bad. And we're going to say slot as canvas panel, just pretty much the same thing we did to move it. And we're going to say set position. And the position we'll be using is from our map info, our position state. So drag these together. And the last thing we want to do is we also want to make sure our current floor right here is set to whichever floor it needs to be. So map info, floor state. Plug this in, and we'll just line this all up. And the last thing we want is to call here our UpdateZoom, because we want to make sure that once we load the map, it is as zoomed as it was when we started. So not this one, we don't want this one. We want to make sure we go into our map info again and load the zoom we saved. So get zoom, I believe. I don't know what we called it. Get scale, sorry, we called it. Scale state. So there we go, plug that in, and now we need to do player centered. So this time, just like before, and so here what we want to do is we want to do like the player. So we want to get our widget once again. Oh, actually we can just copy both of these, that'll work fine. And unlike before, where we just plugged in our player location, we don't want to do that here. So we're going to reroute just to make this more readable. Right click, collapse nodes. And this will be player focus location. Or just loc will do fine. Control click to open it. And what we want is get player character again. Get actor location. And then we want to convert this into our world space or our map space. So once again, world to map. But we can't just plug this in directly. And the reason we can't do that is because this is designed to get it from world space to the map space. But here, we also want to shift the map in the opposite direction so that the player is centered. So not just get the player location, but get the player focus. So it's not the same thing. So to get that, we simply need to do the inverse of pretty much the position on the map. So we will start with the map size, or half the map size, sorry, because we want it to be in the middle. And that is 1280 to 956, which will go into our output here. So we can double click to open this back up again, and we don't actually need two of them. And what we want to do here is we're going to set the floor based on where the player is, and we already have a macro for that. IsOnSecondFloor select int, and that's going to be our current floor. So if player is currently on the first floor, second floor, we want 2, otherwise we want 1. And then we want to do the zoom, because the zoom we can't really do it player focused. We could always set it just to 1, but we'll let it go based on what the player scrolled last time. Now, if it is centered, we don't want to do anything because that will just be our default status. So we don't actually need to do anything. What we want to do here is we're going to next tell it what to do with the floor. So here we're going to do a switch on int, and the integer is going to be our current floor that we set right here. So we're going to say if you are starting at 1, because it can only be 1 or 2, want to have 2. We don't need our default because it's 1 or 2. And if it's 1, we want to select floor 1. Otherwise, we will select floor 2. And there we go. And the final thing we want to do is we want to say load items and load rooms. There we go. So now that this is done, we have everything that loads, but the thing is we still don't save it. And to do that is pretty simple, or to do that, we want to use our event destruct. We want to know when we close the map, what was the last situation or the last positions we were in. So we're going to look for destruct here. So event destruct, we'll just move this to the bottom here. And pretty much we just want to save the information. And the only time where we actually want to save the information if it's not centered, because there's no point in doing this if it isn't centered. It's extra computation for nothing. So look for our map save state. Check if it is different to the top one here from our centered one. And then we're going to put a branch. If it is different, we're going to save information. Otherwise, we're just going to ignore it. So if it's true, we're going to get our zoom, we're going to get our map info, and we're going to say set scale state to be equal to zoom on true. Then we're going to say set position state to our get map position. So plug this in right here. And the last one is we're going to save the floor. So we're going to get our map info again, set floor state to our current floor, and there we go. So this will save it. Now in theory we could also do if it is double equal to previous navigation, because if it's the player we already have most of this information, but we still need to get our scale. So that's why we just do it by ignoring centered and using the other two. There we go. So now we kind of have everything set up. Now all that's left is to hope that this all was done, that we all did this correctly, and then it works on the first try. And to do that check, well, to actually test it, we need to be able to open it. So we're going to go into AC track map info, and we're going to make it so that we can open our map. So I'm going to add an input, which we will call, we'll just look for the input for keyboard, and we'll look for I think. So there we go. Just like pretty much every other widget you probably ever made in a character, we're just going to say create widget. We're going to call it UMG, or ours is UMG map specifically, And we want to make sure we pass in our map info. Once again, if this is not visible, make sure you go back to here, select your map info, make sure it's instance editable and expose on spawn, otherwise it won't work. You need both of those. And we just want to plug in self. Now this is going to get promoted. I'm going to promote this to a variable and call this map widgets. And the next thing we want to do is obviously add it to viewport. And we can now finally do a very simple test of seeing if this works. So if we press I, it should open. And we do indeed have our map. Now the problem is we can't really interact with it because our mouse isn't visible. And as you can see, there's a bit of an issue with our button over there, but that's just because of how it is set up. So the first thing we'll do is we'll make it so our mouse can interact. So to do that, we will say GetPlayerController. And what we want to do is we will say show mouse cursor, set that to true. And then we will say set input mode to game and UI, or actually UI alone will do just fine. We don't need any other. No, actually, sorry, we do, because we're doing this by holding. We kind of do need to say set game and UI. So like this. And the last thing we need, and this is new, I didn't know this before, but we can actually say that our controller set ignore look input. And so what this means is that we will tell it that we don't want the player to, for instance, when you click, for it to drag the camera around. So doing this will stop that from happening. Now, on the other hand, if we release, we want to do the opposite. So we're going to once again get this and just that for now. We will place this on released. We will say set game only. And we will tell it to reset the kind of the camera that I mentioned here by saying reset flags. So right here. And the last thing we want to do is we want to remove our widget. So get a reference to our widget, remove from parent, and there we go. And obviously we also want to make sure that this becomes empty. Otherwise it might consider that it's still here and keep trying to delete it, even though it doesn't exist. And with this, we now have the map working just fine. So I'm going to put this in full screen. If I press I, the map appears. If I drag, we can move it. And it seems to be a bit short on the edges, so it might be able to go a bit further. And the player position is completely off. Player position is moving relative to where we are, which is a bit odd. If we click here, it should swap floors. Let's see if that works. Okay, so it was working. It just for some reason isn't doing it every time. Okay, one thing we can add now. Now, before going and fixing everything, I want to make sure that our items also work. So let's put our item there. We're going to tell it that it is linked to the whole floor 1. We're going to make sure that it is unknown by default. And the item information doesn't really matter. It's going to be ammo. So if we press play, it shouldn't be visible because we've never found it. But if we go and look at it right here, interact with it, it should now appear on the map. So it does appear on the map. And it seems like everything is working relatively speaking. Because for instance, the item is pretty much right in front of the player here. It's just that the whole thing seems to be offset a bit. So I think I might have an idea what's wrong here. But the item is there. But it doesn't seem to have updated the map with the colors. One other thing we can also test is if we go upstairs here, will it change or stop showing our first floor? Yep, because it realizes we're on the second floor. If we go back down, currently it's player focused, which is why it's doing that. So there we go. Okay, so I also just forgot, we also need to uncheck this, not leave it checked, otherwise it doesn't work. Compile, save. Actually, no, don't do that. Leave this here. And instead, that should fix a bit of an issue where if we click here. Okay, sorry. So the reason that is happening is because it's overlapping with itself. So it doesn't like that. There we go. Player is still out of position. Let's see if we can figure out what's wrong there. Okay, so I found the issue. So the issue was inside of our UMG map, the widget switcher shouldn't have this kind of information. It should have been slightly different. So first things first is it needs to be centered instead of fill. And then we want to make sure it is 1600 by 800. So pretty much the size of the map. And then it should appear kind of like this, where you see this outline around it, even though it is locked here and you can't see anything else. And that should fix the issue. So now if we go ahead and play, put it in full screen and do I, as you can see, the player is pretty much around the reception right here. It's not perfect, as I mentioned before, but the size is correct. And if we go and pick up the item here, it should also be pretty much where you would expect it on the map. So right here. So it is working as intended now. And the only problem is it's not working for the colors. For some reason, the colors aren't appearing. So let's try and figure that out as well. Also, the rotation should work just fine. Yep, no problem there as well. So let's try and figure out why the colors aren't appearing. Okay, so I'm not sure what the issue is here. For some reason, and I really don't know, this happened in my testing as well. For some reason, let me just check here, the opacity. Okay, so that's why. So the reason is because for some reason the opacity here has been set to 0. So let's just change this. So in floor 1, floor 2 on map, make sure your opacity is set to something that isn't 0. In my case, it was 0. And so now if we press I, it is red by default. Now that's a bit bright, so we are going to change it down to 0.3 as it should be, but for some reason it wasn't. So for some reason it set itself to 0. And I'm going to go back into our floor and make sure it is by default 0.3. There we go. And so now it should be, there we go. So we get that kind of light red. And if we go over here and pick up this item by pressing F, it should now be blue because there is only one item in that room. Now, next, let's go ahead and add a second one just so we can try that out. And so here we'll put this one as well as, by default, this time we'll put it located. And we'll put whole room 1 as well. So right now there are 2 items to pick up. If we press I, we can actually see this one here. But this one isn't visible yet. So if we go next to it, we have a second one. And if we press F to pick up one, it's still red. If we pick up the second one though, it now becomes blue. So we still have our west office here to test out because we have that with us as well. So let's move this into there by putting it here. Just lift it up a bit. And this one, so now we change our linked room to be the west office. Item info, we'll leave ammo, that's all we have, and we will say that it is unknown to start. So right here, if we look at I, the west office isn't visible because we don't know of any items in there yet. So we need to go and locate that item first, and that should make it visible. So if we go here, it is now located. It has become red. If we pick it up, it is now blue. Now let's go to the second floor to see if when we're on the second floor we can still see these, so that there's no issues there. Around here we should be about on the second floor now. If we press I, we're on the second floor. We can move around, no problem there. It does understand that we are clicking, but the thing is it is also kind of getting mixed up, thinking that the I button is not pressed because we are no longer in game mode. So it assumes that I isn't pressed, but notice that it sometimes is and isn't. So that's why sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. This isn't really the best way to handle opening a widget, but the main goal is kind of to get this, not get a button that works perfectly here. So I do apologize that this is a bit broken here. I hope you can look past that though, and I hope you enjoyed the video, because I think although this is a bit long, it is working quite well. As you can see, you can navigate now around without any problem. Before it was a bit blocking, but now it's fine. If we just go and open our first floor here, we can look around and zoom into specific rooms. And obviously we can't go too far here because it is blocked off because we limited it. And the same here at the bottom. Obviously it looks a bit empty because we have the entrance. That's why it looks like that. Hope you enjoyed. I will see you in the next video. I'm not sure when that will be. I'm rather busy at the moment. I want to thank everybody on Patreon who's been supporting me for the past few months, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.